The blue glow of a nightlight reflected off Sarah Miller's wide-open eyes as she lay perfectly still in her bed. The 7-year-old's teddy bear was clutched tightly to her chest, her ears straining for the sound she knew would come. The old grandfather clock downstairs chimed 11 times, its deep resonance barely audible over the raised voices that had once again filled the Miller home. Sarah counted to 60 in her head, then slid silently from beneath her comforter. With practice and precision, she pulled a small backpack from under her bed and reached for the walkie-talkie on her nightstand. She pressed the button and whispered, "Firefly to Eagle, are you awake? Over." The device crackled softly before her 9-year-old brother's voice came through. "Eagle to Firefly, I'm ready. Meet at the oak tree in 5 minutes. Over and out." Sarah pulled on her rubber boots and zipped up her jacket, careful to avoid the third stair from the top that always creaked. As she slipped out the back door into the cold Pennsylvania night, a dim flashlight clutched in her small hand, she looked back at her childhood home, a once cheerful 2-story house that had recently become a place she could no longer bear to sleep in. The same scene had played out every night for the past 3 weeks, but tonight would be different. Tonight, someone would finally discover their secret. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Officer Ben Taylor had been with the Pinewood Police Department for 15 years, but the overnight shift still felt endless, especially on cold November nights. He sipped lukewarm coffee as he drove his patrol car along Meadow Lane, his headlights sweeping across the silent suburban homes. Most families in Pinewood were tucked safely in their beds at 11:30 p.m., which is why the 2 small figures darting between houses caught his attention immediately. "What in the world?" he muttered, slowing his vehicle. The figures, clearly children, froze like deer in headlights before bolting toward the wooded area that separated the residential area from the older part of town. Ben's instincts kicked in. Children out alone at this hour could only mean trouble. He parked his patrol car and grabbed his flashlight, following the path the children had taken. 20 years on the force had taught him to approach with caution rather than alarm. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered kids sneaking out, though usually they were teenagers, not children who appeared to be elementary school age. "Police officer, I just want to make sure you're safe," he called out, keeping his voice friendly but firm. The only response was the rustling of leaves and the soft sound of hurried footsteps retreating deeper into the woods. Ben followed the narrow dirt path that led toward Pinewood Creek. His flashlight beam caught glimpses of small footprints in the soft earth. As he emerged from the tree line, he spotted a quaint cottage at the edge of town, its windows glowing with warm light, despite the late hour. And there, disappearing through a back garden gate, were the 2 children. Officer Taylor approached the cottage cautiously. The mailbox read Parker, which he recognized as the family name of Eleanor Parker, a respected elderly resident who had lived in Pinewood for decades. Why would children be sneaking to Mrs. Parker's house in the middle of the night? He knocked on the front door, and after a moment it opened to reveal Eleanor Parker in a floral robe, her silver hair tucked neatly into a braid. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern when she saw his uniform. "Officer Taylor, is everything all right?" Her voice was steady, but Ben noticed her glancing nervously toward the back of the house. "Good evening, Mrs. Parker. I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but I just saw 2 children enter your property. I wanted to make sure everything's okay." Eleanor's shoulders tensed slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean, officer. I've been alone all evening." Ben had interviewed enough people over the years to recognize when someone wasn't being entirely truthful. "Ma'am, I followed them from Meadow Lane. They came directly to your house, and I saw them enter through your garden gate. I'd just like to check that they're safe." A moment of silence passed between them, before Eleanor's expression softened with resignation. "I suppose it was bound to come out sooner or later," she said, stepping aside. "Please come in, officer. Taylor, there's something you need to see, but I ask that you keep an open mind." Ben followed Eleanor through her cozy living room, noting the immaculate condition of the house, despite its obvious age. Family photographs lined the walls, many featuring what appeared to be her grandchildren at various ages. She led him to a door at the back of the house and paused. "These are my grandchildren, Sarah and Tyler Miller," she explained in a hushed tone. "They've been coming here almost every night for the past 3 weeks. I've been trying to figure out the right thing to do." She opened the door softly, revealing a small bedroom illuminated by a nightlight. On a twin bed lay a little girl of about 7, sleeping soundly with a stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. On a trundle bed below her, a boy, perhaps 2 years older, was also fast asleep, his backpack still strapped to his shoulders. "They sneak out of their parents' house after everyone's asleep and come here," Eleanor whispered. "They're gone before sunrise, back in their beds before anyone notices they were missing." Ben stared at the sleeping children, professional concern warring with confusion. "Mrs. Parker, why would they do this? And why haven't you contacted their parents?" Eleanor closed the door gently and gestured for Ben to follow her to the kitchen. She put a kettle on the stove before answering. "Because they begged me not to," she said simply, the worry evident in her voice. "My daughter Rebecca and her husband Daniel, they're good people, officer, but things haven't been right in their home lately." She placed 2 mugs of tea on the table and sat down heavily. "The first night Sarah and Tyler showed up, I nearly called Rebecca immediately. Sarah was in tears, saying she couldn't sleep at home anymore because of the scary feelings there. Tyler said he needed to protect his sister." Ben wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "What kind of scary feelings did she mention?" "That's just it," Eleanor said, frustration evident in her voice. "They won't give me specifics. Tyler just says things are bad at home. Sarah says the house feels like it's filled with thunder, even when it's not raining." Eleanor's eyes met Ben's. "I've been to their house several times in the past month. Rebecca seems exhausted, distant. Daniel is working double shifts at the factory since the layoffs. They're struggling, but I've seen no signs of anything that would cause children to flee in the night." Ben considered this information carefully. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Have you tried asking them directly why they keep coming here?" "Of course," Eleanor replied, "but children that age don't always have the words for what they're feeling. Sarah just says she can only sleep when she's here because it's safe and quiet. Tyler says he promised to keep Sarah safe, and this is how he does it. And they make this journey every night, through the woods, in the dark, alone." Ben couldn't keep the concern from his voice. "That's incredibly dangerous." "Don't think I haven't told them that," Eleanor said, her voice breaking slightly. "The first night I tried to drive them home, but they became so distressed that I let them stay. I told myself it would be just the one time while I figured out what to do, but they came back the next night, and the next. I've been walking them home before dawn, watching until they're safely inside, but they just sneak out again the following night." Ben ran a hand through his hair, weighing his professional obligations against the complexity of the situation. "Mrs. Parker, you understand I can't just ignore this. 2 young children are repeatedly putting themselves in danger, and there's clearly something happening in that home that needs to be addressed." "I know," Eleanor nodded sadly, "but please, can we wait until morning? Let them sleep safely tonight. I'll call Rebecca first thing tomorrow, tell her everything. We can sort this out properly in daylight, without terrifying the children further. Ben considered her request. "I'll need to file a report, but I won't wake them now. I'll come back tomorrow at 8 a.m. and we'll all talk together, you, the children, and their parents." Relief washed over Eleanor's face. "Thank you, Officer Taylor. And in the meantime, would you like to see something?" She led him to a small desk in the corner of the living room and opened a drawer, removing a child's notebook with Sarah's special things written in crayon on the cover. "Sarah left this here yesterday. I wasn't going to look, but I was so worried. I thought it might give me some answers." She opened the notebook and handed it to Ben. Inside were childish drawings, each dated meticulously in a 7-year-old's uneven handwriting. The earliest pages showed colorful pictures of a happy family, stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, Tyler, and me, standing in front of a house with a smiling sun overhead. But as Ben turned the pages, the drawings changed. The bright colors gave way to darker shades. The smiling faces disappeared, replaced by downturned mouths or no faces at all. The sun was replaced by storm clouds. The most recent drawing showed the family house with jagged lines emanating from it, like sound waves, colored in harsh black crayon. 2 small figures stood outside the house, holding hands. A winding path led to another house, clearly Eleanor's cottage, where a grandmotherly figure stood in the doorway, her arms outstretched. At the bottom of the page, Sarah had written, "The screaming house and the quiet house." Ben looked up at Eleanor, whose eyes had filled with tears. "They never mentioned screaming," she said softly, "just that it was loud and scary." "Financial stress can put enormous pressure on families," Ben said gently. "It sounds like there might be a lot of arguing going on, enough to make the children feel unsafe." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Rebecca and Daniel have always been so loving with the children. I never thought. But I suppose we all have breaking points." She looked toward the bedroom where her grandchildren slept. "What happens now?" "Now they sleep," Ben replied, standing up. "Tomorrow, we figure out how to help this family. All of them. These kids are clearly showing remarkable resourcefulness and courage, but they shouldn't have to." As Ben prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. "Mrs. Parker, I have to ask, have you noticed any signs that might indicate more serious concerns? Any bruises or injuries on the children? Any mentions of physical harm?" "Absolutely not," Eleanor responded firmly. "Sarah and Tyler are well fed, clean, appropriately dressed for the weather. They're doing well in school from what they tell me. This isn't about neglect or abuse, at least not the kind you're asking about. This is about children who can't bear to be in a home filled with conflict." Ben nodded, relieved but still troubled. Even emotional environments can cause real harm to children. We'll address this carefully, with the family's best interests at heart. As Officer Taylor drove away from Eleanor Parker's cottage, his headlights briefly illuminated the narrow path through the woods. The secret route 2 small children had been brave enough to navigate in darkness, night after night, seeking the peace they couldn't find at home. He thought about his own children, safe in their beds across town, and felt a renewed appreciation for the security they took for granted. Sometimes the deepest struggles of childhood weren't visible bruises or hunger, but the quiet desperation of having nowhere safe to lay your head at night. Ben made a decision as he turned his patrol car toward the station. This wouldn't be just another report filed and forgotten. The Miller family needed help, and those children had already shown more courage than many adults he knew. He owed it to them to respond with equal courage and care. The next morning arrived with a gentle snowfall, the first of the season dusting. Pinewood with a delicate white covering. Eleanor Parker had been awake since dawn, watching the woods behind her cottage transform into a winter wonderland, while anxiety knotted her stomach. She had promised Officer Taylor she would call her daughter, but each time she reached for the phone, she hesitated. How do you tell a mother that her children have been fleeing their home in the dead of night for weeks without her knowledge? In the small bedroom, Sarah was the first to wake. Her eyes flew open as she realized sunlight was streaming through the curtains. "Tyler!" she whispered urgently, shaking her brother's shoulder. "We overslept. Mommy and Daddy will know we're gone." Tyler bolted upright, panic written across his face. "We need to go now." He fumbled with his sneakers, still groggy from sleep. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her kind face etched with resolve. "Children, it's all right. You're not going home just yet. We need to talk." "But Mommy will be so mad," Sarah began, her lower lip trembling. "Sarah, Tyler," Eleanor said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Last night, a police officer saw you coming to my house. He knows about your nighttime visits." Tyler's face paled. "Are we in trouble? Is Nana in trouble because of us?" "No one is in trouble," Eleanor assured them, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her. "But Officer Taylor is coming back this morning and I need to call your parents. We all need to talk about why you keep coming here instead of sleeping at home." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But if we talk about it, it might make everything worse." "Sweetheart," Eleanor said, drawing her granddaughter into her arms. "Keeping secrets this big doesn't make things better. It just makes everyone more afraid and alone." As Eleanor held her grandchildren, she made a silent promise to herself. Whatever was happening in her daughter's home, she would not look away. These children had crossed darkness to find safety. The adults in their lives needed to show at least as much courage in facing whatever truths awaited them. At precisely 8 a.m., Officer Ben Taylor arrived at Eleanor's cottage, now accompanied by Jessica Cooper, the elementary school counselor he had called that morning. Just as they settled in the living room, the sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Through the front window, Eleanor saw her daughter's car pull into the driveway. Rebecca and Daniel Miller emerging with expressions of confusion and concern. Sarah immediately hid her face in her grandmother's side, while Tyler stood straight, his young shoulders squared as if preparing for battle. The morning that followed was filled with revelations that broke and mended hearts in equal measure. Rebecca and Daniel, initially defensive and shocked, gradually crumbled under the weight of their children's fear. The truth emerged in pieces. The factory where Daniel worked had been laying off employees for months. Bills had piled up. The mortgage was 3 months behind. The arguments had started as whispered concerns after the children were in bed, but had gradually escalated to shouting matches that rattled the walls and shattered the peace of their once happy home. "We thought we were protecting them," Rebecca sobbed, reaching for her children who hesitated before moving into her embrace. "We never argued in front of them. We thought they didn't know." "Mummy, the walls in our house are too thin," Sarah said simply. "And sometimes you and Daddy forget to close your bedroom door all the way when you fight about the money being gone." Daniel knelt before his son, his eyes red-rimmed. "Tyler, why didn't you tell us you were scared? Why didn't you come to our room?" Tyler's answer cut through the room like a knife. "Because the last time I did, you told me to go back to bed and let the grown-ups handle grown-up problems. But you weren't handling them. You were just yelling about them night after night." As the painful conversation continued, Miss Cooper gently guided the family toward resources and support. The Pinewood Community Center offered family counseling. The local Factory Owners Association had an emergency fund for employees facing foreclosure. Eleanor offered to help with childcare to reduce the family's expenses. But the most profound change came not from these practical solutions, but from the walls of silence that crumbled that morning. Daniel and Rebecca, faced with the lengths, their children had gone to escape the tension at home, finally acknowledged the toll their private battles had taken on the entire family. "We were so focused on providing a roof over their heads that we forgot what makes a house a home," Daniel admitted, his voice rough with emotion. By noon, a plan had been set in motion. The Miller family would stay with Eleanor for a few days, while they began counseling and sorted out their financial options. Their home wouldn't be lost, but even more importantly, the sense of safety within that home would be rebuilt, one difficult conversation at a time. As Officer Taylor prepared to leave, 7-year-old Sarah approached him shyly, holding out a drawing she had made that morning. It showed 5 figures holding hands, her family and grandmother, with Officer Taylor standing nearby in his uniform. Above them all, she had drawn not storm clouds, but a brilliant sun. "This is for helping us not be scared anymore," she said solemnly, pressing the paper into his hands. Ben Taylor, 15 years on the police force, had responded to countless domestic disturbances, but none had affected him, quite like the silent distress of 2 children braving the night to find peace. He knelt to Sarah's level. "You know, Sarah, you and your brother are 2 of the bravest people I've ever met," he told her. "But you don't have to be that brave anymore. That's what the grown-ups are here for now." That evening, Eleanor's cottage was filled with the sounds of family, not perfect or problem-free, but honest and present. As she watched her daughter and son-in-law truly listening to their children, perhaps for the first time in months, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 2 small children had crossed a dark forest night after night, carrying their fear and hope in equal measure, seeking something as simple and profound as a peaceful place to sleep. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful journeys weren't the ones that took you far from home, but the ones that ultimately led you back to a home transformed by truth and understanding. As Sarah and Tyler settled into the bedroom that night, with their parents' full knowledge and blessing this time, Tyler whispered to his sister, "We don't have to sneak out anymore." Sarah clutched her stuffed rabbit, a smile spreading across her face. "And soon we won't want to," she whispered back, a wisdom beyond her years shining in her eyes. "Mommy promised the screaming house is going to become a talking house instead." In the soft glow of the nightlight, 2 children who had been brave enough to seek safety finally found something even more precious. The hope that they wouldn't need to be so brave again, at least not in that particular way. The adults in their world had finally heard their silent cries for help, proving that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones undertaken by those willing to meet children halfway on the paths they've forged through darkness. The morning light filtered through Eleanor Parker's kitchen window, catching the steam rising from 5 mugs of hot chocolate arranged around her worn oak table. 3 days had passed since Officer Taylor had discovered Sarah and Tyler's nighttime journeys, and while the immediate crisis had been addressed, Eleanor sensed that deeper currents remained unexplored beneath the surface of their family's situation. Rebecca sat at the table, absently stirring her untouched drink. The dark circles under her eyes had only deepened, despite finally having her children sleeping safely under the same roof. Daniel had left at dawn for an early shift at the factory, the weight of providing for his family visibly bending his shoulders as he kissed his wife goodbye. "Mom," Rebecca said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper to avoid being overheard by the children playing in the next room, "I don't know how to fix this." Eleanor reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand with her own. The gesture bridged not just physical distance, but the careful space they had maintained as adults. Rebecca determined to handle her own problems, Eleanor hesitant to overstep. "Tell me what's really happening," Eleanor urged gently. "Not just the financial struggles. There's something more, isn't there?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "How did you know?" "Because I raised you," Eleanor said simply. "And because those children didn't brave the woods night after night, just because of arguments about money." Rebecca's composure finally crumbled. "Daniel lost his job 6 weeks ago," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. The shifts he's been leaving for, they don't exist. He spends days driving around, pretending to look for work, then comes home with fabricated stories about overtime and production quotas. Eleanor absorbed this revelation with growing concern. But why would he? Pride, Rebecca interrupted, wiping tears from her cheeks. Crushing, stubborn pride. He was raised believing a man provides, no matter what. When the layoffs came, something broke in him. He couldn't face telling the kids. He kept insisting he'd find something before we noticed the missing paychecks. But you did notice, Eleanor guessed. Rebecca nodded. 3 weeks ago, I found past due notices he'd been hiding. When I confronted him, it was like watching someone drowning and fighting against the rescue rope. He became so angry, not at me really, but at himself. That's when the fighting started. The pieces were falling into place for Eleanor now. The timing of the children's first nighttime visit, the intensity that had driven them to such desperate measures. The arguments the children overheard were worse than just money problems. Rebecca admitted, it was Daniel's despair, my fear. We've said terrible things to each other, Mom. Things about failure, about disappointment. The kids must have thought our whole marriage was falling apart. Her voice dropped even lower. Some nights, I've wondered that myself. From the living room came the sound of Sarah's laughter, a bright, unburdened sound that had been absent for weeks. Eleanor felt a surge of protectiveness toward her grandchildren, but also toward her daughter and son-in-law, who were drowning in a crisis they hadn't been equipped to handle. Rebecca, listen to me, Eleanor said firmly. This family isn't broken. It's wounded. There's a difference. How can we possibly come back from this? Rebecca asked, desperation edging her voice. The children literally fled their own home. What kind of mother doesn't notice her children sneaking out night after night? The kind who's carrying more weight than any one person should have to bear, Eleanor answered. You and Daniel both made mistakes in how you handled this crisis, but the love in this family is still intact. I've seen it in how those children worry about both of you, even while they were afraid. A small noise from the doorway made both women turn. Tyler stood there, his young face serious as he took in his mother's tears. Sarah peeked around her brother's shoulder, clutching the stuffed rabbit that had accompanied her on every nighttime journey. Is Daddy in trouble? Tyler asked directly, his protective instincts extending now to his father. Rebecca started to offer a reflexive reassurance, but caught herself, remembering how their attempts to shield the children had backfired so profoundly. Come sit with us, she said instead, gesturing to the empty chairs. As the children hesitantly joined them at the table, she continued with careful honesty. Daddy is having a very hard time right now. He lost his job, but he was too embarrassed to tell us. Is that why he gets up early and comes home late, but we still don't have enough money for groceries sometimes? Tyler asked, his perception startling the adults. Rebecca nodded, fighting fresh tears. Yes, he's been pretending to go to work because he feels ashamed. But why? Sarah's forehead wrinkled in confusion. My friend Emma's daddy lost his job last year, and they just ate more spaghetti for a while. Nobody was mad at him. The simple wisdom of her daughter's perspective hit Rebecca like a physical force. She had been so caught up in Daniel's reaction and her own fears that she had lost sight of the most basic truth, that love wasn't conditional on financial stability. Grown-ups sometimes forget what matters most, Eleanor explained to Sarah. We get confused and think we have to be perfect to be loved. Tyler, ever the practical one, leaned forward. So if we tell Daddy we don't care about the job, just about him, will he stop pretending? Will you and Daddy stop fighting so we can go home? The directness of the question hung in the air between them. Rebecca realized her children were offering a path forward, one paved with honesty and unconditional love, the very things she and Daniel had lost sight of in their spiral of shame and fear. I think that would help very much, she said carefully, but fixing this will take time. Daddy and I need to learn how to talk to each other again without shouting, and we need to be honest with each other and with you. Ms. Cooper says it's okay if families have problems as long as they work on them together, Sarah offered, referring to their session with the school counselor the previous day. Rebecca reached out, drawing both children into an embrace. When did you two become so wise? She whispered against their hair. As the family moment unfolded, Eleanor slipped quietly from the kitchen to answer a knock at the front door. Officer Ben Taylor stood on her porch, not in uniform today, but in casual clothes, a folder tucked under his arm. "Ms. Parker," he greeted her warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to check on the family and bring some information that might help." He held up the folder. Resources from the county employment office, assistance programs they might qualify for, and something else I thought might be important. Eleanor invited him in, leading him to the small study off the main living area to give Rebecca and the children their privacy. As they settled into the comfortable chairs, Ben opened the folder and extracted several papers. "I've been thinking about this family situation," he began. "Financial hardship is tough enough, but there's a specific kind of pressure men like Daniel face, a generational expectation about being providers that can be crushing when circumstances make that impossible." Eleanor nodded, surprised by his insight. "That's exactly what's happening. Daniel has been pretending to go to work rather than admit he was laid off. Rebecca just told me this morning." Ben's expression softened with understanding rather than judgment. "I suspected something like that might be at play. My own father did similar when I was about Tyler's age. Took the bus downtown every day for weeks, pretending to go to his job after the factory closed. Nearly destroyed my parents' marriage." "How did your family get through it?" Eleanor asked. "Community," Ben answered simply. "People who stepped up without making my father feel like a charity case. Which brings me to this." He pulled out a business card. "Carlos Ramirez. He owns the hardware store on Maple Street and mentioned yesterday that he's looking for an experienced manager. Daniel's factory background would be valuable there." Eleanor stared at the card, hope and caution warring within her. That sounds promising, but Daniel's pride. He might see this as pity. "That's why I thought you might be the one to approach Daniel with it," Ben suggested. "Not as a handout, but as information shared between family members. And there's something else." He hesitated before continuing. "The reason I connected with Mr. Ramirez was because of my community outreach program for the police department. We work with local businesses to create opportunity pathways for families in crisis." "You're doing more than your job requires," Eleanor observed. Ben's expression grew serious. "When I saw those two little kids navigating the woods in the dark, something shifted for me. They were willing to face real danger to find peace. How could I do any less to help create a solution where they don't have to make that choice?" Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Daniel Miller entered, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and resignation. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Officer Taylor. "I didn't go to work today," he announced without preamble, his voice hollow. "There is no work. There hasn't been for 6 weeks." Eleanor crossed to him quickly. "Rebecca told us, Daniel. We're going to figure this out together." Daniel's shoulders slumped, the pretense he'd maintained for weeks finally abandoned. "I drove around for hours, trying to find the courage to come back here and face everyone with the truth. I've been such a coward." "No," Eleanor corrected gently. "You've been a man trying to carry an impossible weight alone." Ben stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Miller, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help when we need it." Daniel looked at the offered hand warily before accepting it. I suppose you know everything now. About the lies, about how I've failed my family. What I know, Ben replied, is that you have two incredible children who love you enough to brave the dark rather than add to your burdens. That speaks to the father you've been in the good times. Now you have a chance to show them how a family faces challenges together. From the kitchen doorway, Rebecca appeared with Tyler and Sarah flanking her like small guardians. The moment Daniel saw them, something crumbled in his expression. Not defeat, but the walls he had erected around his shame. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you all, but I was just making everything worse." What followed was the kind of family reckoning that changes trajectories, painful but necessary, with truths laid bare and new understandings forged. Sarah and Tyler listened as their parents spoke honestly about their fears and failures. Rebecca and Daniel heard, truly heard, how their attempts to shield their children had instead terrified them. By evening, the atmosphere in Eleanor's cottage had transformed. The tension remained, but beneath it ran a current of cautious hope, not that their problems would magically disappear, but that they would face them together, honestly, without the destructive weight of secrets. After the children had been tucked into bed, the adults gathered in Eleanor's living room. Daniel studied the business card Ben had provided, turning it over in his hands repeatedly. "I don't know the first thing about hardware," he admitted. "But you know inventory, logistics and management," Ben pointed out. "Those skills transfer. Carlos isn't looking for a handyman. He's looking for someone who can run operations while he focuses on expansion." Daniel's resistance was palpable. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity to match skills with needs," Eleanor said firmly. "And it's not weakness to accept help when you're drowning." Rebecca, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke. "When the children were babies, and I was overwhelmed, you told me that accepting help wasn't failure, it was wisdom. Why is it different for you?" Daniel had no answer for this, the contradiction in his thinking exposed by his wife's simple question. "I'll make you a deal," Ben offered, leaning forward. "Come to the community center tomorrow morning. We're having a job networking breakfast, dozens of local employers. No pressure, just information. If nothing feels right, no harm done. But don't decide now that help isn't for you." Slowly, reluctantly, Daniel nodded. "I can do that." As Ben prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. "There's one more thing. Ms. Cooper suggested it might be helpful for the children to have a controlled experience of facing their fears about returning home. She thought perhaps a daytime visit to your house tomorrow might be a good first step." The suggestion hung heavy in the air. Sarah and Tyler had not set foot in their home since the night Officer Taylor discovered them in the woods. "I think that's wise," Eleanor said. "The longer they stay away, the bigger the monsters grow in their imagination." Rebecca and Daniel exchanged uncertain glances, but ultimately agreed. The plan was set. Daniel would attend the networking breakfast, then the family would visit their home together in the afternoon, just for a few hours, before returning to Eleanor's for the night. After Ben left, the three adults sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the day settling around them. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice subdued but steadier than it had been in weeks. "I never thought I'd fall this far," he admitted. "My father worked the same factory floor for 40 years without missing a day. I lasted 12 before becoming redundant." "The world your father worked in doesn't exist anymore," Eleanor said gently. "Job security, company loyalty, those aren't guarantees now if they ever truly were. What terrifies me," Daniel continued, "is that I don't know how to be a father, a husband, without being the provider I always believed I should be. Who am I, if not that?" It was Rebecca who answered, reaching for his hand across the space that had grown between them. "You're the man who taught Tyler to ride a bike after falling a dozen times yourself. You're the one who sits through Sarah's endless tea parties without checking your watch. You're the person who held my hand through 38 hours of labor with Tyler and never once complained about your cramped back. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. But none of that puts food on the table or keeps the electricity on. No, Rebecca agreed. But it's why we'll fight to find a way through this together. Because you've always been more than just a paycheck to us. We just need to help you remember that. The night deepened around Eleanor's cottage. In the small bedroom, Sarah and Tyler slept peacefully, no longer needing to plot midnight escapes. In the guest room, Rebecca and Daniel shared a bed for the first time in weeks, the physical distance between them still present, but no longer insurmountable. And in her own room, Eleanor Parker said a quiet prayer of gratitude. The children's desperate nighttime journeys had set in motion a painful but necessary reckoning. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be walked in daylight together, with truth lighting the way. Morning arrived with a tentative brightness that matched the mood in Eleanor's kitchen. Daniel stood by the door in his one good suit, freshly pressed, a mixture of determination and trepidation in his stance. "You look very handsome, Daddy," Sarah observed from her place at the breakfast table, her legs swinging beneath her chair. Daniel managed a small smile, straightening his tie nervously. "Thank you, Pumpkin." "Remember what Ms. Cooper said," Rebecca reminded him gently. "This isn't just about finding a job today. It's about connecting with resources." Daniel nodded, though his expression suggested he still viewed the networking event as a measure of his worth, rather than a step in a process. He knelt to hug his children, holding them a moment longer than usual. "I'll see you all this afternoon for our house visit," he promised, his voice carefully neutral for the children's benefit. After Daniel left, Eleanor noticed Tyler watching the door with concern. "He'll be all right," she assured her grandson. Tyler turned his serious eyes toward her. "Will we? Be all right at our house today, I mean?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to the anxiety they all felt about the planned visit to the Miller home. Eleanor chose her words carefully, respecting the children's need for honesty while nurturing hope. "Your house is just a building, Tyler. What makes it scary or safe are the feelings inside it and the words spoken there. Today will be different because you and Sarah have been brave enough to tell the truth about your fears, and your parents are listening." Sarah pushed her cereal around her bowl thoughtfully. "But what if the yelling comes back when we go home? For real? What if it gets dark and scary again?" Rebecca moved to sit between her children, drawing them close. "Then you'll tell us right away," she promised. "No more trying to protect Mommy and Daddy from knowing you're afraid. That's not your job." "But we can still visit Nana whenever we want?" Sarah asked, seeking reassurance. "Absolutely," Eleanor confirmed, "but through the front door in daylight with permission, not sneaking through the woods at night." Tyler nodded solemnly. "The woods are pretty scary when it's dark. I pretended. They weren't because Sarah needed me to be brave, but sometimes I heard noises." He shuddered slightly at the memory. Rebecca's face paled at this reminder of the dangers her children had faced. "You won't ever have to be that kind of brave again," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. The morning passed with gentle, routine homework from the school assignments Rebecca had picked up, a short walk around Eleanor's garden to enjoy the winter sunshine, a phone call from Ms. Cooper checking on their progress. Throughout it all, Eleanor observed her daughter and grandchildren with quiet attention, noting how Rebecca seemed to be truly seeing her children, perhaps for the first time in months, listening to their small observations and responding with genuine presence. Shortly after noon, Daniel returned from the networking event, his expression unreadable as he entered the kitchen. 4 pairs of eyes turned to him expectantly. "Well?" Rebecca prompted when he remained silent. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. "I have 3 interviews scheduled for next week," he announced. "Actual interviews, not just applications into the void. And Mr. Ramirez wants me to come in tomorrow to see the operation, talk specifics." The relief in the room was palpable. Tyler pumped his fist in a gesture of victory, while Sarah launched herself at her father for a hug. "Does this mean we can keep our house?" she asked, her voice muffled against his suit jacket. Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "It's not quite that simple, sweetheart. Even if I get a job right away, we're behind on payments. But Officer Taylor introduced me to a financial counselor who's going to help us work with the bank, see if we can make arrangements." "The important thing," Rebecca added, meeting her husband's gaze over their daughter's head, "is that we're going to figure it out together. No more secrets about money or bills or work. Or feelings," Tyler added pointedly, displaying wisdom beyond his 9 years. "Ms. Cooper says families need to talk about feelings too, not just facts." Daniel nodded, the truth of his son's words hitting home. "You're right, buddy. That's been the hardest part for me, but I'm learning." After lunch, the moment they had all been both anticipating and dreading arrived. It was time to visit the Miller home. They piled into Rebecca's car, the short drive passing in nervous silence. As they pulled into the driveway of the modest 2-story house, Eleanor noticed, both children tense visibly. "Remember," she said gently, "we're just visiting for a little while today. We'll all go back to my cottage before dinner." The house had a neglected air about it, mail piled on the front step, unmowed lawn, a general sense of a place that had ceased to be cared for as its inhabitants' attention turned to mere survival. Daniel collected the mail with a grimace while Rebecca unlocked the front door. The children hesitated on the threshold, Sarah clutching her brother's hand tightly. "It feels different," she whispered. "That's because we're all here together." "In the daytime," Tyler reasoned, though he too seemed uncertain. They moved through the house slowly, the adults watching the children for signs of distress. Sarah approached her bedroom cautiously, as if expecting to find it transformed in her absence. When she saw her familiar stuffed animals and pink bedspread exactly as she had left them, some of the tension left her small shoulders. "It looks the same," she said, sounding surprised. "What did you think you would find?" Eleanor asked gently. Sarah's answer came after a thoughtful pause. "I thought maybe the scary feelings would be visible somehow, like dark clouds stuck to the ceiling or shadows in the corners." Her description, offered with a child's concrete thinking, provided a powerful window into how she had experienced the emotional turbulence in her home. To Sarah, the arguments and tension had been almost physical presences, entities that might leave visible traces. Daniel knelt beside his daughter. "The scary feelings were real, Sarah, but they were inside Mommy and Daddy, not in the house itself. We brought them with us, and then we filled the rooms with them when we shouted." "Are they gone now?" she asked doubtfully. "Not completely," he admitted, honoring their commitment to honesty. "Daddy still feels scared sometimes about money and work. Mommy still worries about our family. But we're learning how to talk about those feelings without turning them into shouting that frightens you." As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor watched a careful healing begin to take place. The family moved through their home, rediscovering small joys. Tyler's collection of rocks displayed on his windowsill, Rebecca's half-finished quilt project in the spare room, photo albums from happier times pulled from bookshelves and poured over together on the living room floor. When they gathered in the kitchen, Daniel stood in the center of the room, his expression solemn. "This is where some of our worst arguments happened," he acknowledged. "Late at night, when we thought you couldn't hear." Tyler nodded. "The vent in my room connects to the kitchen. I could hear everything." This revelation seemed to hit Daniel and Rebecca with particular force, the concrete reminder that their attempts to shield their children had been futile, that the infrastructure of their home itself had carried their angry words directly to their children's ears. "I have an idea," Eleanor suggested, sensing the need for a ritual of reclamation. "Why don't we make something together in this kitchen? Create a new memory to layer over the difficult ones." The suggestion was seized upon eagerly. Soon, the kitchen that had been the site of so much conflict was filled with different sounds: measuring cups clattering, Sarah's giggles as flour dusted her nose, Tyler's serious questions about why baking soda made cookies rise. Daniel and Rebecca moved around each other carefully, the teamwork of baking helping them practice a new way of being together in this space. As the smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the house, Sarah observed, "Our house smells happy again." The simple statement brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. "It's going to stay that way," she promised, "even when we have problems to solve." By the time they prepared to return to Eleanor's cottage, something had shifted. The Miller home no longer loomed in the children's imagination as a place of fear. It had been reclaimed, not as a perfect space, but as one where healing could begin. In the car, Sarah leaned against her grandmother's arm, her voice thoughtful. "Nana, do you know what I think?" "What's that, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked. "I think maybe our midnight adventures helped fix our family," Sarah said. "It was scary, and we probably shouldn't have done it, but if we hadn't, maybe Mommy and Daddy would still be having secret fights and pretending everything was okay." From the front seat, Rebecca's eyes met Eleanor's in the rearview mirror, the truth of her daughter's assessment landing squarely between them. "Sometimes," Eleanor replied, carefully, "it takes something dramatic to make adults pay attention to what really matters. You and Tyler were very brave, and yes, your midnight journeys did help our family face some hard truths, but from now on, let's agree that problems get solved in daylight, with words instead of secret escapes. Deal?" "Deal," Sarah and Tyler chorused. As they drove back toward Eleanor's cottage, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road. Eleanor found herself studying the path through the woods that her grandchildren had traveled so many nights, the physical manifestation of their desperate search for peace. Children shouldn't have to be that resourceful, that brave in pursuit of what should be their birthright, a sense of safety in their own home. Yet in their courage, Sarah and Tyler had not only sought refuge for themselves, but had ultimately forced the adults in their world to confront the truths they had been avoiding. There was wisdom in that, Eleanor reflected, the kind that often comes from the most unexpected sources, wrapped in the simple clarity that only children can sometimes provide. The Miller family still had a long road ahead, financial challenges to navigate, trust to rebuild, new patterns of communication to establish. But they would walk that road together now, in daylight, with honesty lighting the way. And if darkness fell again, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that Sarah and Tyler would no longer feel the need to flee into the night. They had found their voice, and the adults in their world had finally learned to listen. 2 weeks had passed since the Miller family's first daytime visit to their home. Winter had settled more deeply over Pinewood, transforming the woods between Eleanor's cottage and the Miller house into a crystalline wonderland of snow-laden branches and ice-tipped pine needles. The path that Sarah and Tyler had once traversed in fearful darkness now glittered in the morning sunlight as Eleanor walked it alone, savoring the peaceful quiet. So much had changed in those 14 days. Daniel had accepted the position at Ramirez Hardware, starting as assistant manager with a promise of full management responsibilities within 6 months. The financial counselor had negotiated a payment plan with the bank, allowing the Millers to keep their home provided they met the new terms. Most importantly, the family had begun the delicate work of rebuilding trust between parents and children, between husband and wife, between hope and reality. Eleanor reached the edge of the woods, where the trees gave way to the miller's backyard. The house looked different now. Curtains drawn back to welcome light, the lawn cleared of snow in neat pathways, holiday lights strung along the porch railing. Small changes that signaled a home being reclaimed by a family finding its way back to wholeness. Today marked a significant milestone. After 2 weeks of daily visits and 3 overnight stays, the Miller family was officially moving back home. Eleanor had come early to help prepare, her car trunk filled with groceries for a celebration dinner. As she approached the back door, Sarah burst out to meet her, practically vibrating with excitement. "Nana, we slept here last night, and I didn't have any bad dreams at all. Not even one." Eleanor scooped her granddaughter into a hug. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart." "And Daddy didn't pretend to go to work today," Sarah continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He had breakfast with us and showed us his real work clothes for the hardware store and said we can visit him there sometime to see where the Hammers live." The simple joy in Sarah's recounting spoke volumes about the progress the family had made. The atmosphere of secrecy that had suffocated the household had given way to a new transparency, one where even mundane details like work uniforms became causes for celebration when shared openly. Inside the kitchen, Rebecca was unpacking boxes of dishes, restoring order to cabinets that had been neglected during the family's partial absence. The dark circles beneath her eyes had faded, and though weariness still marked her features, it was the honest fatigue of hard work and healing rather than the bone-deep exhaustion of secret-keeping. "Mom, thank goodness you're here," Rebecca greeted her. "I'm realizing how much we left behind when we started staying at your place. It's like we've been camping in our own home these past few weeks." Eleanor set her grocery bags on the counter. "Well, today that changes. This house becomes a home again, properly, fully." Tyler appeared in the doorway, carrying a stack of books. At 9, he had shouldered responsibilities far beyond his years during the family crisis, appointing himself his sister's protector and navigator during their nighttime journeys. The past 2 weeks had seen a gradual easing of that burden, allowing glimpses of the child beneath the self-imposed role of guardian. "Nana, did you bring the special cookies?" he asked, his priorities clear. Eleanor smiled. 2 dozen chocolate chip in that bag. But therefore after dinner. "Tyler's helping me organize the bookshelves," Rebecca explained. "He's developed quite a system. Alphabetical by author, then by title, except for series which stay together," Tyler reported seriously. "Organization is important. The key." Comment might have seemed simply precocious from another child, but Eleanor recognized it for what it was. Tyler's way of establishing control in a world that had felt chaotic. While Sarah processed her feelings through drawings and stories, Tyler sought structure and order, creating systems to make sense of his environment. Daniel appeared from the basement, toolbox in hand. The change in him was perhaps the most dramatic of all. Gone was the haunted look of a man drowning in shame. In its place was a cautious determination, the expression of someone who had faced his worst fears and, while not conquering them entirely, had at least learned they wouldn't destroy him. "Just fixed that loose banister," he reported. "Been needing repair for months." Eleanor noted the significance. Daniel was reclaiming his role in maintaining their home, but in a healthier way. Not as the sole provider whose worth was measured by financial contribution, but as a father and husband whose value came from showing up, being present, contributing what he could. "Where should we put Nana's presents?" Sarah asked, pointing to the wrapped packages Eleanor had brought along with the groceries. "Those aren't presents, honey," Eleanor corrected gently. "Just a few things to make the house feel more like home again." But of course, to Sarah, anything wrapped in colorful paper constituted a gift. With her parents' permission, she eagerly tore into the packages, revealing items Eleanor had carefully chosen: a new set of kitchen towels to brighten the space, scented candles to create warmth, a family board game for creating new memories, and a special housewarming gift that had required assistance from Officer Taylor. "What's this?" Rebecca asked, lifting the wooden frame from its wrapping. Eleanor smiled. "A symbol, I suppose." The frame contained a detailed map of Pinewood, with 2 locations circled in red: the Miller home and Eleanor's cottage. Between them, a golden thread had been carefully embroidered, following the exact path through the woods that Sarah and Tyler had traveled on their nighttime journeys. "The Path of Courage," read the small brass plaque at the bottom of the frame. Daniel studied it silently, his fingers tracing the golden thread. "So we never forget," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Not the fear or the secrets," Eleanor clarified, "but the bravery it took to seek help and the journey back to each other." Rebecca hung the framed map in the living room, where it would serve as both commemoration and reminder. Not all family. Mementos celebrated happy occasions. Some marked moments of growth through difficulty, victories won through tears and truth-telling. As the morning progressed into afternoon, the house gradually transformed. Boxes were unpacked, surfaces dusted, beds made with fresh linens. The physical act of restoring order to their living space seemed to mirror the emotional work the family had been doing, clearing away what no longer served them, creating space for new beginnings. Shortly after noon, a car pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, Eleanor spotted Officer Ben Taylor, today in uniform, accompanied by Ms. Cooper, the school counselor. Their visit had been prearranged. A final check-in before officially closing the case file that had been opened the night Ben discovered the children in the woods. "Look at this place," Ben remarked appreciatively as he entered. "Quite a transformation." "The house or the family?" Daniel asked with a small smile, extending his hand. "Both," Ben replied, shaking Daniel's hand warmly. "How's the new job working out?" As Daniel described his first week at Ramirez Hardware, Eleanor observed the easy rapport that had developed between the 2 men. What could have been an adversarial relationship, officer of the law versus father who had failed to notice his children's midnight escapes, had instead become a genuine connection based on mutual respect. Ben had seen beyond the crisis to the good man struggling beneath, and Daniel had recognized the officer's intervention as life-changing rather than punitive. Ms. Cooper settled in the living room with Sarah and Tyler, conducting her final assessment through casual conversation rather than formal questioning. Eleanor watched from the doorway as the counselor engaged the children in a drawing activity, noting how Sarah no longer used only dark colors in depicting her home, and how Tyler's rigid body language had softened over the weeks. "They're going to be okay, aren't they?" Rebecca whispered, joining Eleanor in her observation. "They already are," Eleanor assured her. "Children are remarkably resilient when they feel safe and heard. You've given them both those things now." Rebecca leaned against her mother's shoulder, a gesture reminiscent of her own childhood. "We came so close to losing everything: our home, our marriage, the children's trust, all because we thought keeping up appearances was more important than facing reality." "Many families make that mistake," Eleanor said gently. "The miracle is that you found your way back before it was too late." The afternoon brought more visitors, Mark and Jenny Wilson from next door, bearing a homemade casserole and neighborhood news. Tyler's friend Zach and his parents, returning books and toys that had been borrowed before the family's temporary relocation. And finally, Principal Wright, stopping by with folders of schoolwork and encouraging reports of both children's academic progress, despite the family disruption. What struck Eleanor most about these visits was the community that had assembled around the Millers once their struggles were brought to light. Where Daniel and Rebecca had feared judgment, they found support. Where they expected pity, they discovered empathy. The very things they had worked so hard to hide, financial hardship, marital strain, parenting challenges, turned out to be experiences shared by many of their neighbors, albeit in different forms. "It's strange," Daniel commented quietly to Eleanor as they prepared dinner together. "For weeks I drove around town pretending to go to a job that didn't exist, thinking I was the only man in Pinewood facing this kind of failure. Now I discover that Carlos at the hardware store went bankrupt in his first business. Mark Wilson next door was unemployed for 8 months during the recession. Even Officer Taylor's father went through something similar." Eleanor nodded, understanding. Shame thrives in isolation. It's why bringing things into the light is so powerful, not just for healing, but for connection. "I wish I'd known that sooner," Daniel said, regret coloring his voice. "Before the kids felt they had to run away." "They didn't run away," Eleanor corrected gently. "They ran towards something. There's a difference." Daniel considered this distinction. "They ran towards safety because we'd made our home feel unsafe. And now you're making it safe again," Eleanor reminded him. "That's what matters moving forward." The celebration dinner that evening transformed the Miller kitchen from a place of tension to one of joy. Every seat at the table was filled. The family of 4, Eleanor, Officer Taylor, who had accepted their invitation to join them, and Ms. Cooper, who had stayed at Rebecca's insistence. Sarah insisted on saying grace, her small hands gripping her brother's and her grandmother's on either side of her. "Thank you for our food and our house and for helping Daddy not be sad about work anymore. And thank you that we don't have to walk in the dark woods because we can talk about scary feelings instead of hiding them. And thank you for chocolate chip cookies. Amen." Today, the simple prayer, offered with a child's directness, brought smiles and a few discreetly wiped tears around the table. In acknowledging both the struggle and the progress, Sarah had summarized their journey more eloquently than any adult could. The conversation flowed easily throughout the meal, punctuated by laughter that would have been unimaginable in this kitchen a month before. Stories were shared, plans made for the upcoming holidays, gentle teasing exchanged between family members. All the ordinary elements of a family dinner, yet rendered extraordinary by the knowledge of how close they had come to losing this simple togetherness. After dessert, the promised chocolate chip cookies with ice cream, Ms. Cooper formally closed her case file. "Based on my observations and the children's responses, I'm confident that the necessary changes have been implemented in this household," she announced. "I'll recommend no further mandatory counseling, though my door is always open should you want additional support." Officer Taylor nodded agreement. From the police department's perspective, this case is also closed. What began as a potential child welfare concern has been appropriately addressed. He smiled at Sarah and Tyler. "Though I hope you two will still say hello when you see me around town. Can we visit you at the police station sometime?" Tyler asked eagerly. "I've been thinking I might want to be a police officer when I grow up, or maybe a hardware store manager. I haven't decided yet." The adults laughed, not at Tyler's ambitions, but at the wonderful normality of a 9-year-old boy contemplating future careers based on the adults he admired. It was yet another sign of healing, the ability to look forward with hope rather than backward with fear. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor prepared to leave for her cottage. Though she had initially planned to spend this first night back with the family, she recognized that they needed this time alone together, not as a fragmented household holding secrets, but as a united family beginning anew. Sarah clung to her grandmother at the door. "Promise you'll come back tomorrow." "Of course I will," Eleanor assured her. "And you can come visit me too, just not in the middle of the night anymore." Sarah giggled. That was pretty scary sometimes, especially when the owl made those hooting noises. "You were very brave," Eleanor acknowledged, "but brave doesn't mean you should have to be scared. Remember that, always." After final hugs and goodbyes, Eleanor walked to her car, where Officer Taylor waited to escort her home. As they drove the short distance to her cottage, she gazed out at the darkened woods that had once been the setting for her grandchildren's desperate journey. "What you did for this family goes far beyond police work," she commented. "The job connection, the financial counselor, the ongoing support, none of that was required of you." Ben kept his eyes on the road, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I became a police officer to help people, not just enforce laws. Sometimes that means seeing the bigger picture." He glanced at her briefly. "Besides, those kids showed incredible courage. How could I do any less?" When they reached Eleanor's cottage, Ben helped her inside with the few belongings she'd brought back from the Miller home. In the quiet of her living room, Eleanor felt both the satisfaction of a crisis resolved and a curious emptiness. For weeks, her home had been filled with the sounds of her grandchildren, the challenges of a family in healing. Now, that chapter was closing. "They're going to be okay," Ben assured her, reading her expression. "Because of you." Eleanor shook her head. "Because of those children. Sarah and Tyler forced us all to see what was happening. I just provided a safe place for the truth to come out." "Sometimes that's the most important thing anyone can do," Ben observed. "Create space for truth, however painful." After Officer Taylor left, Eleanor moved through her cottage, straightening things that didn't need straightening, adjusting to the silence. She paused at the small bedroom where Sarah and Tyler had slept during their stays, now neat and empty. On the bedside table lay a folded piece of paper she hadn't noticed before. Opening it, she found a drawing in Sarah's distinctive style. It showed the Miller family standing together in front of their house, holding hands. Off to the side stood a figure that was clearly Eleanor, and beside her, a figure in a police uniform that could only be Officer Taylor. Above them all shone a brilliant yellow sun, and across the bottom, in careful letters, Sarah had written, "Our family is bigger now." Eleanor smiled through sudden tears. Children had a way of seeing truth that adults often missed. The Millers' journey through crisis had indeed expanded their definition of family, drawing in not just Eleanor, but also the officer who had discovered their children in the night, the counselor who had helped them articulate their fears, the neighbors who had rallied around them in support. Family was no longer defined just by the walls of a house or the bonds of blood, but by who showed up when darkness fell, who walked beside you through the woods toward healing and home. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the December, sun casting long shadows across the fresh snowfall. Eleanor had slept better than expected, the knowledge that her grandchildren were safe in their own beds, providing comfort that outweighed the silence of her cottage. She was halfway through her morning coffee when the telephone rang. "Mom!" Rebecca's voice sounded tentative on the line. "Is everything okay?" Eleanor smiled at the role reversal, her daughter checking on her well-being rather than the other way around. "Everything's fine. How was your first night back as a complete family?" "Different," Rebecca admitted. "Good different, but still. We've all changed, haven't we? There's no going back to before." "That's not necessarily a bad thing," Eleanor pointed out. "Before wasn't working, remember? That's why the children felt they had to leave." A thoughtful silence followed. "Daniel and I talked for hours after the kids went to bed," Rebecca finally continued. "Really talked, not argued. About everything: money, work, parenting, our marriage. Things we should have discussed weeks ago instead of shouting about them in the kitchen at midnight." "And," Eleanor prompted gently. "And we're okay," Rebecca said, wonder in her voice. "Not perfect, not completely healed, but solid. We're going to make it through this." The simple declaration carried enormous weight, not a naive promise that all problems were solved, but a mature recognition that they had found the strength and tools to face challenges together rather than apart. "I never doubted it," Eleanor told her daughter. "Not once I saw how hard you were both willing to work for your family." After the call ended, Eleanor bundled up for a walk. The crisp winter air filled her lungs as she followed the now familiar path through the woods, the same route her grandchildren had traveled in darkness for those desperate weeks. In daylight, with no fear driving her forward, she could appreciate the quiet beauty of the forest, the cardinal that flashed red against the snow, the intricate patterns of frost on fallen logs, the way sunlight filtered through the evergreen branches. She emerged from the tree line at the edge of the miller's backyard, not announcing her presence immediately. Through the kitchen window, she could see the family engaged in ordinary morning activities. Daniel at the table reviewing paperwork for his new job, Rebecca packing lunches, Tyler quizzing Sarah on spelling words before school. The scene was unremarkable in its normalcy, yet profoundly moving in context. These simple morning rituals had been fractured by fear and secrecy just weeks before. Now they unfolded in the clear light of day, rebuilt on a foundation of hard-won honesty. Eleanor was about to approach the back door when Sarah spotted her. Through the window, the little girl's face lit up with delight as she raced outside, not even pausing for a coat despite the winter chill. "Nana, you came early!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around her grandmother's waist. "I wanted to walk you and Tyler to school today," Eleanor explained, ushering her granddaughter back toward the warmth of the house. "If that's okay with your parents." Inside, Rebecca welcomed the offer gratefully. "That would be wonderful. I need to drop some paperwork at the bank this morning, and Daniel has orientation at the hardware store." As the family finished their morning preparations, Eleanor observed the subtle but significant changes in their interactions. Daniel and Rebecca moved around each other with a new awareness, small touches and glances communicating connection. Tyler seemed more relaxed, less vigilant, allowing himself to be a child rather than his sister's protector. And Sarah hummed. As she packed her backpack, the anxious silence that had marked her behavior replaced by a gentle confidence. The walk to Pinewood Elementary took them through the center of town, past the hardware store, where Daniel would soon begin his day, past the police station where Officer Taylor waved from the doorway, past the community center where the Miller family had begun attending weekly counseling sessions. Each landmark represented a thread in the safety net that had formed around them, connections made possible only after their struggles were brought to light. At the school entrance, Principal Wright greeted them warmly. "Good morning, Miller family. Sarah, Ms. Thompson has a special job for you today. You're going to help the kindergartners with their winter art project." Sarah's eyes widened with pleased surprise. "Really? I get to be a helper?" "Really?" Principal Wright confirmed. "She specifically requested you because of your artistic talent." As Sarah skipped off toward her classroom, bursting with the importance of her assignment, Principal Wright turned to Tyler. "And Mr. Peterson was hoping you might assist with organizing the science supplies this morning. He mentioned something about your excellent categorization skills." Tyler straightened, pride evident in his posture. "I can definitely help with that. Organization is one of my specialties." After the children had disappeared into the school building, Principal Wright spoke quietly to Eleanor. "We've been finding small ways to give them both leadership roles and responsibilities. It helps rebuild their sense of agency and control after everything they've been through." Eleanor nodded appreciation. "You're giving them back their childhood, one small opportunity at a time." "That's the goal," Principal Wright agreed. "Children are remarkably resilient, but they need the right support. Your grandchildren are fortunate to have such a strong circle of care around them." As Eleanor walked back through town, she reflected on the principal's words. A circle of care that was indeed what had formed around the Miller family. Not just Eleanor herself or Officer Taylor, but an entire community that had stepped forward once the need was known. Teachers adapting to support the children's emotional needs, neighbors offering practical help, counselors providing professional Guidance, employers creating opportunities rather than judgments. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor that all of this support had been potentially available weeks earlier if only Daniel and Rebecca had been willing to reach out instead of suffering in isolation. The very thing they had feared, exposure of their struggles, had ultimately been their salvation. When Eleanor reached her cottage, she found a small package on her front step with a note from Officer Taylor. "Thought you might want one of these." The framed map at the Millers reminded me how important it is to remember significant journeys. Ben. Inside the package was a small compass, its brass casing gleaming in the winter sunlight. The simple gift brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. How fitting that Ben, who had first discovered her grandchildren navigating the darkness without proper guidance, would give her something designed to help find one's way. Eleanor placed the compass on her mantle, alongside the family photographs that chronicled generations of Parkers and Millers. Among them now stood a new frame containing Sarah's drawing of their bigger family, a testament to how crisis had expanded rather than diminished their circle of belonging. As she settled into her favorite chair with a book, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. The journey wasn't over for the Miller family. Healing rarely followed a straight or simple path. There would be difficult days ahead, financial challenges to navigate, trust to continue rebuilding, but they would face those challenges in daylight now, together, with truth as their compass and love as their destination. The woods between. Her cottage and the Miller home would always hold the memory of two small children braving darkness to find safety. But now that path was walked in daylight, with purpose rather than desperation. The midnight journeys had ended, replaced by intentional connections that honored both the distance between separate homes and the invisible threads that bound their hearts together. Golden lines on a map of belonging that no darkness could erase. 6 months had passed since the winter night when Officer Ben Taylor discovered two small children walking through the woods in the darkness. Spring had blossomed into early summer across Pinewood, transforming the once snow-covered path between the Miller home and Eleanor's cottage into a lush green corridor dappled with sunshine and wildflowers. Eleanor Parker sat on her front porch, a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of cookies beside her, watching the path expectantly. Saturday afternoon visits had become a cherished ritual. Sarah and Tyler making the journey to Nana's cottage in broad daylight, sometimes with their parents, sometimes permitted the independence of walking the now familiar route alone. Today was special. It marked exactly half a year since the night that had changed everything for their family. In the Miller household, this day had been designated as Courage Day, a commemoration not of the crisis itself, but of the bravery shown by every family member in finding their way back to each other. Eleanor spotted them first, Sarah's yellow sundress flashing between the trees, Tyler walking beside her with careful attention still, but without the hypervigilance that had once characterized his protective stance toward his sister. Behind them came Rebecca and Daniel, walking hand in hand, their pace relaxed and synchronized in a way that spoke of renewed connection. "Nana, we brought something," Sarah called, running the final stretch to the porch and presenting a cloth-wrapped bundle. "It's for today." Eleanor welcomed them all with hugs before sitting back down, Sarah immediately claiming the spot next to her on the porch swing. "And what might this be?" she asked, accepting the mysterious package. "Open it," Tyler urged, taking a cookie from the plate. "Dad helped us make it." Eleanor unwrapped the cloth to reveal a beautiful wooden box, its lid carved with an intricate design of trees and a winding path. The craftsmanship was impressive, the wood sanded smooth and finished with a warm stain that brought out its natural grain. "Daniel, did you make this?" Eleanor asked, admiring the detail. Daniel nodded, a touch of pride in his expression. "Mister," Ramirez has been teaching me woodworking. He says I have a natural talent for it. Open the box, Nana, Sarah prompted, practically bouncing with anticipation. Inside, Eleanor found a collection of items, each seemingly ordinary, but clearly imbued with significant meaning. A small flashlight, a child's walkie-talkie, a compass much like the one Ben Taylor had given Eleanor, a hand-drawn map, a sachet of dried pine needles that released the scent of the woods when touched, and at the bottom, a leather-bound journal. It's a memory box, Tyler explained seriously, for Courage Day. We wanted to keep the important things, Sarah added, so we never forget how brave we were and how everything changed. Rebecca sat on Eleanor's other side, her eyes soft, with emotion. The children's idea. They said some memories are too important to trust just to our minds. Eleanor lifted the journal questioningly. Daniel cleared his throat. That's from all of us. We've each written about that time, what we remember, what we learned, how we feel now. Even the kids contributed. We drew pictures for the parts that were hard to explain with just words, Sarah clarified. Eleanor opened the journal, careful, not to read the private entries, but noting the different handwriting styles. Rebecca's elegant cursive, Daniel's precise block letters, Tyler's methodical printing, and Sarah's exuberant scrawl accompanied by colorful illustrations. This is precious, Eleanor said, genuinely moved, a family's journey documented. We thought you should keep it, Rebecca explained. You were the safe harbor that made everything else possible. The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. In the months since the crisis, she had watched this family rebuild itself with remarkable courage and honesty. Daniel had flourished at Ramirez Hardware, his natural leadership abilities emerging once freed from shame. Rebecca had returned to her online teaching courses, now with Daniel's full support. The children had gradually reclaimed their childhood roles, security, allowing them to focus on growth rather than survival. I have something for today too, Eleanor said, setting the memory box aside carefully. She reached behind her chair and produced a small pot containing a young sapling, its slender trunk supporting a canopy of delicate leaves. It's a red maple. I thought perhaps we could plant it today, halfway between our homes, along the path. Daniel smiled at the symbolism. A living marker. Exactly. Eleanor nodded. Something that will grow as you do, putting down roots and reaching upward. The simple ceremony that followed was Eleanor's favorite kind. Meaningful without pretension, symbolic without spectacle. The family walked together to a sunny spot along the pathway, where Daniel dug a hole of appropriate depth and width. Each family member added a handful of soil around the sapling's roots, murmuring their own private thoughts or wishes as they did. Sarah went last, patting the earth with solemn deliberation. Grow strong and tall, she instructed the young tree, and watch over our path forever and ever. As they stood back to admire their handiwork, a familiar voice called from the direction of Eleanor's cottage. Officer Ben Taylor approached, dressed in casual clothes rather than his uniform, carrying what appeared to be a picnic basket. "Hope, I'm not interrupting," he said, his warm smile taking in the gathered family and the freshly planted tree. "Ben, you made it," Eleanor welcomed him. The friendship that had begun during the Miller family crisis had deepened over the months, his weekend visits to Eleanor's cottage becoming a regular occurrence that neither felt the need to explain or define. "I wouldn't miss Courage Day," Ben replied, setting down his basket, "especially since I heard there might be a special picnic involved." Sarah immediately took his hand, tugging him toward the newly planted maple. "We just put in Nana's tree. It's going to grow as big as the sky someday and watch over our special path." Ben knelt to examine the sapling with appropriate seriousness. "Excellent choice. Red maples live for hundreds of years. This little fellow will be standing right here long after all of us are gone, keeping your story alive." Tyler, ever the practical one, frowned slightly. "But if we're gone, how will people know why the tree is important? They'll just think it's a regular tree." Ben considered this valid point. "That's why we tell our stories, pass them down. Some things deserve to be remembered." As they walked back to Eleanor's cottage for the planned picnic, Rebecca fell into step beside Ben. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said, her voice pitched for privacy. "The night you found the children in the woods, was it really just a chance patrol? It's always seemed like such an incredible coincidence." Ben's expression remained carefully neutral. "Why do you ask?" "Something Tyler said recently," Rebecca explained. "He mentioned that on one of their earlier trips to Mum's cottage, he thought he saw headlights following at a distance, but they disappeared when he looked more closely. He wondered if someone had been watching over them even before that final night." Ben was silent for a long moment, then sighed softly. "Mark Wilson called me," he admitted finally. 3 days before I officially found the children, he'd spotted them, cutting through his yard one night, but didn't want to frighten them by approaching directly. He recognized them as your children and was concerned. "So you knew," Rebecca stated, no accusation in her tone, merely understanding. Ben nodded. "I did a few extra patrols, kept an eye out. I wanted to make sure they reached their destination safely while I figured out the best way to approach the situation. They were remarkably stealthy for children their age, careful, methodical. It took me those 3 nights to confirm the pattern and determine that Eleanor's house was their destination." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Rebecca asked. Ben's expression softened. "Because the story belongs to Sarah and Tyler, their courage, their journey. I didn't want to diminish that by suggesting they were being watched over all along. Sometimes the narrative we create about our experiences is as important as what actually happened." Rebecca considered this thoughtfully. "Thank you," she said finally, "not just for watching over them, but for understanding what they needed afterward, to own their bravery, to be acknowledged for taking action rather than being seen as victims. They're remarkable children," Ben said simply. "They deserve the truth of their own courage." The picnic that afternoon unfolded across Eleanor's back lawn, blankets spread beneath the shade of old oak trees. The mood was celebratory but reflective, conversation flowing easily among the adults, while Sarah and Tyler alternated between joining in and dashing off to explore the familiar wonders of their grandmother's garden. As the afternoon progressed, Daniel shared news of his promotion to full manager at Ramirez Hardware. Carlos is opening a second location in Westfield," he explained. "He wants me to run the original store while he focuses on the expansion." "That's wonderful," Eleanor exclaimed, genuinely pleased for her son-in-law. The change in Daniel over these 6 months had been remarkable. The return of his confidence, not as brittle pride, but as earned self-respect. "The best part," Daniel continued, "is that it comes with a small ownership stake. Not much, but it's a beginning, a foundation. For the future," Rebecca squeezed his hand. "We're going to be okay," she said, the simple statement carrying the weight of hard-won certainty. Really okay, not just pretending. Later, as Ben helped Eleanor clear away the picnic remnants while Rebecca and Daniel supervised the children's impromptu game of tag, he nodded toward the family. "They've come a long way." "They have," Eleanor agreed, "though I think the journey changed us all, didn't it?" Ben's gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. "It certainly changed me. Reminded me why I became a police officer in the first place. Not just to enforce rules, but to truly help people in crisis." As evening approached, with fireflies beginning to blink in the gathering dusk, the Miller family prepared to walk home. Sarah clutched a small jar containing 3 of the magical insects, granted permission to take them home for brief observation before releasing them in the morning. Next Saturday, Tyler confirmed with his grandmother, maintaining his preference for clearly established routines. Next Saturday, Eleanor promised. Though you're welcome any day, you know that. The family made their way along the path toward home, Sarah skipping ahead with her glowing jar, Tyler following at a more measured pace, Rebecca and Daniel bringing up the rear with arms linked comfortably. Eleanor and Ben watched from the edge of her property until they disappeared among the trees. They don't need flashlights anymore, Ben observed. They know the way by heart now. In more ways than one, Eleanor agreed. Later that night, after Ben had gone home with promises to call the next day, Eleanor sat on her porch in the gentle June darkness. She held the memory box the Millers had created, running her fingers over its carved surface. The home that had, once terrified 2 children enough to send them fleeing into the night, had been reclaimed as a place of safety and truth. The path that had once been traversed in fear now connected 2 households in love. She opened the box and carefully removed the journal, feeling that enough time had passed to permit her to read the family's reflections. She turned to the first page, where Rebecca had written an introduction in her elegant hand. This is the story of how our family lost its way and how 2 brave children led us back. It begins with secrets and fear, with a home that stopped feeling safe and parents who forgot to listen. It continues with midnight journeys through the woods, 2 small figures holding hands in the darkness, seeking the light of a grandmother's window, and it concludes not with a perfect ending, but with a new beginning, one built on honesty, courage, and the understanding that true safety isn't found in the absence of problems, but in facing them together, in daylight, with love as our compass. Eleanor read each entry slowly, honoring the raw honesty with which each family member had captured their experience of that difficult time and the healing that followed. Daniel wrote of shame so profound it had rendered him mute to his own family, of the crushing weight of perceived failure, and of the painful, liberating process of learning that his value transcended his economic contribution. Rebecca described the slow erosion of trust in her marriage, the growing fear for her children's emotional well-being, and the breakthrough moment when she realized that protection sometimes meant allowing vulnerability rather than enforcing silence. Tyler's entry was methodical and observant, detailing the practical aspects of organizing the nighttime journeys, the maps he'd drawn, the supplies he'd gathered, the safety procedures he'd implemented to protect his sister. Between the lines of his careful account lay the unwritten story of a 9-year-old boy assuming responsibility far beyond his years, finding control where he could in a world that had become frighteningly unpredictable. Sarah's contribution consisted primarily of drawings, each labeled in her uneven handwriting. The screaming house showed their home with jagged black lines emanating from it. The midnight path depicted 2 small figures holding hands among towering trees. The safe place portrayed Eleanor's cottage, glowing with warm light. And finally, the talking house, which showed the same home from the first drawing, but with the black lines replaced by colorful speech bubbles containing hearts and smiling faces. The final page held a collective entry written in Daniel's precise hand, but signed by all 4 family members. We choose to remember these difficult days, not to dwell in pain, but to honor the courage it took to find our way through them. We record this journey as testament to what we've learned, that secrets can be more dangerous than truth, that asking for help is strength, not weakness, that children deserve to be heard, especially when they're afraid, that a family is not defined by perfection, but by how it faces imperfection together. And most importantly, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to let others see our broken places, trusting that what will flow into those cracks is not judgment, but light. Eleanor closed the journal, her heart full. The midnight journeys that had once signified crisis had been transformed into a family touchstone, a shared story of courage and renewal. The path through the woods was no longer a desperate escape route, but a connection between two homes filled with love. She placed the journal back in the wooden box, alongside the small objects that had assumed almost talismanic significance. The flashlight that had guided small feet through darkness, the walkie-talkies that had connected brother and sister in their mission, the compass that had helped them find their way home in more ways than one. As Eleanor prepared for bed, she thought about the red maple sapling now growing along the path, its roots already seeking depth, its branches reaching toward light. In years to come, it would grow tall and strong, a living marker of a turning point in all their lives. Children not yet born would play beneath its shade, perhaps hearing the story of how their parents or grandparents once walked a midnight path in search of safety, and in doing so, helped an entire family find its way home to each other. Outside, her window fireflies danced in the summer darkness, their intermittent glow a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light finds a way to shine through. Eleanor thought of Sarah and Tyler, safely asleep in their beds across the woods, no longer needing to flee in the night. She thought of Rebecca and Daniel, their marriage stronger for having been tested, their parenting more attuned for having been challenged. And as she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor reflected on how the most important journeys rarely follow straight lines or easy paths. Sometimes they lead through darkness and fear before reaching light and understanding. Sometimes they require the courage of children to show adults the way forward. And sometimes they bring us full circle, not to where we began, but to where we always needed to be. The last conscious thought Eleanor had before sleep claimed her was of the golden thread embroidered on the framed map hanging in the Miller home, the path of courage, and how it had expanded beyond a physical route through the woods to become the invisible connections binding their hearts together, a path once walked in fear, now traveled in love, a journey that had begun with midnight escapes and ended with the most profound homecoming of all, the return to truth, to trust, to a family healed and whole. 2 years had transformed the red maple sapling into a sturdy young tree, its branches now wide enough to cast meaningful shade along the woodland path between Eleanor's cottage and the Miller home. The autumn leaves had turned brilliant scarlet, creating a canopy of color that seemed to celebrate the season of harvest and reflection. Eleanor stood beneath the tree, her fingers tracing the small brass plaque that had been added to its base the previous spring. In memory of midnight journeys and the courage to seek light, it read, followed by a simple date marking the night Officer Ben Taylor had discovered 2 frightened children walking through the darkness. Today held particular significance. Sarah was turning 9, the same age Tyler had been during their secret woodland expeditions. The milestone felt weighty with meaning, a marker of how far they had all traveled from those desperate winter nights when home had felt like the most dangerous place on earth. The sound of approaching footsteps made Eleanor turn. Tyler, now 11 and noticeably taller, emerged from the direction of the Miller house, carrying a large wrapped package. His serious demeanor had softened over the years, though traces of his protective nature remained in the careful way he navigated the familiar path. "Is that for the birthday girl?" Eleanor asked, gesturing toward the package. Tyler nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "It's from all of us, but mostly from me. I've been working on it for months." Before Eleanor could inquire further, Sarah burst through the trees with her characteristic exuberance, her dark blonde hair now reaching past her shoulders and adorned with a crown of autumn leaves she had clearly crafted herself. At 9, she had lost none of her artistic flair, but had gained a confidence that radiated from her bright smile. Nah, Tyler won't tell me what my surprise is, but he keeps grinning like he swallowed a secret, she announced, launching herself into Eleanor's waiting embrace. Behind Sarah came Rebecca and Daniel, walking with the easy familiarity of a couple who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger. Daniel's face had filled out slightly, the gaunt look of chronic stress, replaced by the healthy appearance of a man content with his place in the world. Rebecca's eyes held a serenity that spoke of hard-won peace. Following them was Ben Taylor, no longer just a family friend, but someone whose presence had become integral to their gatherings. His relationship with Eleanor had deepened gradually, naturally, without fanfare or formal declarations. At 52, he had found in her a companion who shared his appreciation for quiet moments and meaningful conversations. "Happy birthday, sunshine," Eleanor said, kissing Sarah's forehead. 9 years old. That's quite an accomplishment. It feels important, Sarah replied with characteristic seriousness, like I'm finally old enough to understand things I couldn't before. The observation struck Eleanor as remarkably perceptive. At 9, Sarah was indeed approaching the age to fully comprehend the family crisis that had shaped her early childhood, to understand the adult complexities that had driven her and Tyler into the woods that winter. They gathered in Eleanor's backyard, where a small party had been arranged. Nothing elaborate, just the way the Miller family preferred their celebrations now. Intimate, genuine, focused on connection rather than spectacle. A picnic table held Sarah's favorite chocolate cake, decorated with 9 candles that flickered in the gentle autumn breeze. As they settled around the table, Daniel raised a glass of cider. To Sarah, who taught us all that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is seek help when you need it. And to Tyler, Rebecca added, lifting her own glass, who showed us that protecting the people you love sometimes means taking extraordinary risks. Tyler's cheeks flushed with pleasure at the acknowledgement, though he maintained his characteristic modesty. "We just did what felt right," he said simply. "That's exactly what made it brave," Ben observed quietly, "acting on what feels right, even when it's difficult or frightening." After the cake and initial gifts, art supplies for Sarah's growing collection, books for her voracious reading appetite, a new journal to document her thoughts and dreams. Tyler presented his mysterious package with visible nervousness. Well, it's something I've been thinking about for a long time," he began, his usual confidence wavering slightly. "I wanted to make sure Sarah would understand it now that she's older." Sarah unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a beautifully bound book with a cover that took Eleanor's breath away. Tyler had commissioned a local artist to create an illustration based on Sarah's childhood drawings. 2 small figures holding hands on a moonlit path, walking toward a distant cottage, glowing with warm light. "The Midnight Path, a True Story," read the title in elegant script. Sarah opened the book to find Tyler's carefully written account of their nighttime journeys, complete with maps he had drawn from memory, photographs of the actual locations, and copies of Sarah's original drawings from that difficult time. But more than just a record of events, Tyler had crafted a story of courage, family, healing, and hope. "Tyler," Sarah whispered, turning the pages with reverent care, "you wrote our story." Tyler nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I thought maybe someday other kids might need to know that they're not alone when things get scary at home, that there are always adults who will help if you're brave enough to ask." Rebecca covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by her son's thoughtfulness and maturity. Daniel put an arm around Tyler's shoulders, pride evident in his expression. "This is extraordinary," Eleanor said, examining the book more closely. "Tyler, this isn't just a family keepsake. This is something that could genuinely help other children facing similar situations, Ben leaned forward, his professional instincts engaged. Have you considered sharing this more widely? The community center has programs for families in crisis. Something like this could be incredibly valuable. Tyler looked uncertain. I just wanted Sarah to have it. I wasn't thinking about other people reading it. That's what makes it so powerful, Eleanor assured him. It comes from a genuine place, not from someone trying to write what they think others want to hear. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the conversation naturally turned to the changes the past 2 years had brought. Daniel shared news of his partnership expansion at Ramirez Hardware, his woodworking skills having evolved into a profitable side business. Rebecca had completed her teaching certification and was now working at Pinewood Elementary, where she had become a particular advocate for children showing signs of stress at home. It's amazing how many children carry worries they don't know how to express, Rebecca observed. I see it in their drawings, their behavior, the way they interact with their peers. The experience with Sarah and Tyler has made me much more attuned to those subtle signals. Sarah looked up from where she had been absorbed in Tyler's book. Do you help them like you helped us? I try to, Rebecca replied gently. Mostly by making sure they know there are safe adults they can talk to, and by working with their families to improve communication. Ben nodded approvingly. You've become exactly the kind of resource that could have helped your own family earlier in the process. As twilight began to settle over the gathering, Eleanor noticed Sarah studying the path toward home with a contemplative expression. What are you thinking, sweetheart? Sarah closed Tyler's book and looked up at the assembled adults. I was just wondering, if we hadn't been brave enough to walk through the woods that night, would things have gotten better on their own? The question hung in the air, its implications complex and profound. Daniel and Rebecca exchanged glances, recognizing the weight of their daughter's inquiry. That's a very mature question, Daniel said carefully. The honest answer is that we don't know. Your mom and I were stuck in patterns that were hurting everyone, but we might have found other ways to break out of them eventually. But you also might not have, Tyler added with characteristic directness, and things might have gotten worse instead of better. Rebecca nodded sadly. Tyler's right. We were so caught up in our own fears and pride that we weren't seeing clearly. Your midnight journeys forced all of us to confront truths we had been avoiding. Eleanor watched Sarah process this information, noting the child's remarkable capacity for understanding complex emotional dynamics. Sometimes, Eleanor offered gently, the most important thing isn't whether other solutions might have worked. It's that you found a solution that did work, and you showed incredible courage in pursuing it. Sarah seemed satisfied with this response, returning her attention to Tyler's book. I like how you told the story, she said to her brother. It doesn't make us sound like heroes, just like regular kids who got scared and tried to fix things. That's exactly what you were, Ben confirmed. Regular kids who did extraordinary things because extraordinary times called for it. As the evening drew to a close, the family prepared for the short walk home. The path that had once been traversed in fear and secrecy was now traveled openly, often multiple times a day, as the Miller household had fully integrated Eleanor's cottage into their extended family space. Same time next week for Sunday dinner? Rebecca asked Eleanor, the question more formality than actual inquiry. Sunday dinners had become a sacred tradition, rotating between Eleanor's cottage and the Miller home. Wouldn't miss it, Eleanor confirmed, accepting hugs from each family member. Tyler lingered after the others had started down the path. Nana, do you really think the book could help other kids? Eleanor studied his earnest face, recognizing the depth of his caring nature. I think it could help more than just other children, Tyler. Parents, teachers, counselors, police officers, anyone who works with families in crisis. Your story shows that children are often more aware of family problems than adults realize, and that they're capable of taking positive action when given the right support. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. Maybe we could talk to Ms. Cooper about it. She would know how to get it to the people who need it. That's an excellent idea, Eleanor agreed. Your story deserves to be shared if you're comfortable with that. After Tyler had jogged to catch up with his family, Eleanor and Ben remained on the porch, watching the small group disappear into the gathering darkness. Unlike those desperate winter nights 2 years earlier, their departure brought no anxiety, only the comfortable certainty of their return. You know, Ben mused, in all my years of police work, I've rarely seen a family crisis resolve as completely as this one has. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, appreciating his solid presence. I think it's because everyone, even the children, was willing to do the hard work of honest examination and change. Too often, people want healing without growth, resolution without accountability. The children led the way, Ben observed. They refused to accept a dysfunctional normal, even when it would have been easier to just endure it. Eleanor nodded, thinking of the countless families who lived with dysfunction because addressing it seemed too difficult, too risky, too uncertain. Sarah and Tyler were fortunate to have each other and to have a safe place to go. Not all children in similar situations have those advantages. This sobering thought led them both to contemplate the broader implications of the Miller family's story. How many other children were silently witnessing family breakdown, carrying burdens too heavy for their small shoulders, lacking the resources or courage to seek help? Tyler's book could be part of the solution, Ben suggested. Not just the story itself, but the conversations it might spark. Sometimes people need to see that others have walked similar paths successfully. Over the following weeks, Tyler's book began to circulate through Pinewood's network of family services. Ms. Cooper shared it with colleagues at other schools. Ben brought copies to community meetings. Rebecca used it as a discussion starter in workshops for parents facing financial stress. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, it was practical. Several families reached out to share their own stories of children showing signs of distress at home. A support group was formed for parents learning to recognize and respond to their children's emotional needs. The community center expanded its family counseling services. Eleanor watched these developments with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that Sarah and Tyler's midnight journeys had created ripples extending far beyond their own family's healing. Their story had become a catalyst for broader community awareness and support. One evening in late November, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she found a new drawing slipped under her door. In Sarah's distinctive style, it showed not two small figures walking a dark path, but an entire procession of families walking together in daylight, adults and children holding hands, moving toward a cluster of houses that glowed with warm, welcoming light. At the bottom, in Sarah's careful script, she had written, "Now, lots of families know the way home." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the profound truth in her granddaughter's artistic vision. The path that had begun as a desperate escape route for two frightened children had evolved into a roadmap for community healing and support. The courage Sarah and Tyler had shown in seeking help had given other families permission to acknowledge their own struggles and seek assistance. As Eleanor placed the drawing in her collection of Sarah's artwork, she reflected on the unexpected ways healing spreads. One family's willingness to face hard truths had created space for other families to do the same. One child's artistic expression had become a tool for helping other children find their voices. One police officer's compassionate response had inspired a community to look more carefully at the subtle signs of family distress. The red maple tree continued to grow along the woodland path, adding new rings each year, its roots deepening. and spreading beneath the soil. Like the tree, the impact of that winter night continued to expand, creating new connections, offering shelter to others traveling difficult paths, standing as a living symbol of the truth that even the darkest journeys can lead to light. Eleanor turned off her lights and settled into bed, comforted by the knowledge that across the woods, two children who had once fled their home in fear now slept peacefully in beds surrounded by love and safety. Their midnight journey was complete, but its legacy continued to guide others through their own darkness toward the healing light of truth, community, and hope. The path between the cottages remained, no longer a route of escape, but a bridge of connection, traveled daily by family, members secure in their bonds, visitors bearing friendship, and neighbors offering support. What had begun with two small figures walking hand in hand through winter darkness had become a thoroughfare of community care, marked by a red maple tree that grew taller and stronger with each passing season, its branches reaching toward the sky like prayers of gratitude for second chances and new beginnings. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.